we had, while I was in the service, the night I pulled in the Panama Canal coming back from Chile, our barn burnt. Lightning hit it and burnt it down. Well, anyway, I had an old fellow, Fred Kimball. He was going to help build a new barn back there then, and he was out there with me, working for us, and I had another hand there. And it was an awful bad storm that night. Well, I sleep good. When I went to bed and go to sleep, I don't hear the phone. Well, they said I was on a party line. They said that phone rang all night. Well, I never did hear it. Well, they'd had this big deal out there with Mr. Hovey, and we'd borrowed a light plant. We didn't have electricity, and our old light plant wasn't running. And Daddy had borrowed one from the old Kibby school and brought it down there, and we used it. Well, they wanted it back. Cecil Colford told him they was going to have a sale, so I had loaded it. Now, we'd bought an old armored scout car for a vehicle there on the ranch, and I'd loaded this outfit into it, and the starter wasn't working good on it. It was the only vehicle I had to push it off the hill to start it, and I was going to take it home that next day. Well, I took it over to Kibby and unloaded it, went back into Supply to get the mail, and they were just cars continually on the road. I said, what's the matter? What's all the traffic? Well, then they told me about Woodward blowing away, and I didn't know it had blown away. And didn't have any radio or nothing out there to the information, and know the phone hadn't rang for me. And so the old car, my old pickup, left the old truck running, and I started to come down. Well, if it blowed away, I might not be able to. They had to take it to the mechanic down here to get it fixed, and or else I'd park it on my hill. So I said that. I thought, well, I'd better get on home. I had chores to do anyway, so I went on home. Well, the next morning, Daddy and my brother come down from Guyman and want to know why I wasn't down here helping. And well, I didn't realize what had gone on. So I got in the car with them and we come down here. Well, then it was the next afternoon. Well, things was pretty well taken care of, a lot of the emergency and work and such as that. So we looked around and we went on back home. But we drove down and there was a big beam at a filling station. Had fell on the cab. The fellow had pulled his truck in for protection, I guess. The beam had fell down across on his cab and killed him. And I remember coming by there and seeing it. Well, later on I found out that he was still in there. It was a day or two before they found him in his cab there. That beam had killed him. And there was a car sitting on 8th Street that we come by there. And it was out of Texas. And it had left, well, one of the towns down in Texas. And that storm had carried that thing all the way in, and they'd identified it with papers in the pocket. And it wasn't much taller than the tires, just like a beat-up tin can. And it was sitting on 8th Street. I identified by we seen it there, and then later on I found this out that that's where that car, that tornado, had picked that thing up, and no telling how many times it hit the ground. And different things and rolled at, and it wound up on 8th Street down here.
What did Woodward look like?
Oh, it's, well, you can tell any stories you want to about a tornado and I'll believe it. You can't make them too tall. But it was a pitiful sight to see it the next few weeks. It was just tore and blowed all to pieces.
How many were killed?
Well, there was over 100 killed, and one has never been found. There was one baby, of course, hearsay, that they had there at the hospital. They feel like they checked it in, and they never seen it again. Well, they feel like that the father from California or west somewhere come and got it. They don't know, and I've never heard anything or any more about it. But it was from a broken family, and they feel like that he come and got that child. But anyway, it left the hospital, and they don't know what become of it. But you see straws drove through poles. But what it is, a tornado, the center of the eye is a complete vacuum. and it pulls things apart, that vacuum. And then anything flying or falling will go into the cracks. And it's quite something.
Well, you got married in
55.
55. You have, what, 2 boys?
Well, I had 2 boys, and the older boy didn't make his 17th birthday. He had an aneurysm, and vein ballooned in his head, and took him.
So you have 1 son left?
There's 1 son left, and he's on the ranch with me, and really taking a hold, and going to be take it and go from here.
Yep.
Doing real fine.
Have any grandkids?
Got 1. He's not a year old yet. Got a
Well,
dandiest daughter-in-law.
Good.
They live out there on the place.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Easterwood, I think we have a good interview.
Oh, there's lots of stories a fella can tell over his life. But
Yeah.
my father, he was a fella, he wouldn't tell old stories, to sit down and visit with him. Always looked ahead. He wanted to talk, visit with young people. Fellas what to do ahead, looking ahead. He didn't want to talk, didn't hardly want to even visit with old people about old times. He'd always visit with the young fellas and look on ahead. I know he was in the hospital at Wichita. He had the cataract off his eye. It was back there in about 53. And I took him to Wichita, and he had it worked on. He had his own private room down at the end of the hall. He'd get up, he'd put on his clothes, go down to didn't have a bathroom there in the room, to go to the bathroom. Nurse said, didn't know whether he's a patient or a visitor. Well, he said, do that. I said, I'd go somewhere. Come back. He didn't want to stay in bed all the time. Why? He said, I want to be around them old men down there. See, he wasn't that old like that. Be around them old people. In fact, he was, when he was 85, he passed away, but he was, I guess when he was 84, the Lions Club and Supply made up baskets of fruit to give to the elderly people in the community. And they insulted him, they brought him a basket. He was, why? He wasn't one of them old people. But that's the kind of a person he was. He just always looking on.
Yep.
And consequently, there was lots of those old stories and things that happened that I didn't find out from him. But it's good to get down a lot of these happenings.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you.
Dalton's come by and camped there where my son lives for about a week or so. And that he said that Emmett Dalton said he was the best shot he ever saw. So he just took his rifle and played with the coyote over on the side of the field. Just shoot in front of him, just turn him. Said he just keep turning him. Just play with him. Said, Law, he was a shot. Just do anything with a gun.
Any other outlaws come through here?
All they, of course, back then, there was a lot of them. This old ranch, well, probably when it was the syndicate, there's an old cottonwood tree west of the house, and they said they started out one morning and the cowboys got 2 of them got in an argument. Said, oh, they was arguing and by the way they drew on each other, and one of them killed the other one. Well, it was just a fair fight argument, you know. So the foreman, the boss there, the boy that done the shooting, he called him over and says, all right, he says, you pick you a horse. Put your outfit on him, and he says, when you go over that hill, he says, I don't never want to see you again. Just sent him on.
Yep.
There was no use to have a trial, all of that. It was fair fight.
Yep.
As far as shooting him, just over the argument there. So and they buried him there somewhere, the other fella. Just fellas coming through the country, no families, no nothing. So they just buried the one and sent the other and all. It was wild days back then.
Yep.
Different world altogether.
Sure was.
Yeah.
A year ago in June, she was a diabetic and she had a stroke. 43 years of age. That was the same age as Dick when he died, was 43. And but I had those 5 kids all at OSU at one time in college.
I don't see how she managed 5 at once in college.
Well, I had 10 children, and I have 9 of them with degrees.
Well, that's pretty
But
good.
some of them got it and worked, you know, all. And my boy right now, did I tell you about my boy being a court spy?
No.
Well, he has a master's degree in interior designing too, and he worked 20 years in Houston. But 6 years ago, he got concerned about, he lost 5 friends that graduated the same year he did from OSU that got on drugs, and he had to quit associating with them because of the drugs. So that's something. Now, he did do a little drinking, but he didn't start drinking until his senior year in college. But he had a sick spell, and the doctor told him he should never touch alcohol. That was in November of '76. He quit then. He's worked for the last 6 years with alcoholics and drug addicts, and he's almost got he likes the part of a semester having his doctor's degree in therapy. He's a counselor. He's working at Court Supply, and they said he's doing more than anybody's done since he's been up there.
Well, that's real good.
The girls talked him into coming home the 1st of September, and he went to work up there, and they really were well pleased with him.
What's his name?
Harry Keaton. But he's 43 years of age, and no, he's 42 years of age. I can get messed up here. He was born in 43, and he was 42 in January. But they say he's doing more with those people up there than anybody has been able to do with them.
Well, that's good.
So, but he likes what he's doing, and he's working day and night on it. But he took one of his tests last week down to the city.
In first part of December, you could see what he's going to do whole winter. Ride a horse all day, every day. Well, he quit, and I done took care of that thing with myself. And I'd get up in the morning and pull out and make my rounds of feeding, and back in, maybe if I got in by 1 o'clock or better, I'd eat dinner before I went south to feed a bunch. Well, then I'd have to come back and haul cake out. Well, I was feeding over a ton a day. Well, then I'd have to haul out to these cake houses. Well, I done that clear all through up until in March by myself. And old Fred Kimball stayed out there with me some, but just for a place to stay.
Yeah.
But that's a long old road by yourself.
Sure is.
And then one summer, I had a hay crew there. There was about 10 or 11 of us, putting up hay, baling, mowing, doing it all. Well, I was doing the cooking and getting dinner for them. Well, I had my milking to do of a morning. We milked cows all the way. Had a milk cow. Doing my chores, and I had one boy there that wasn't hay, was a regular hand, would help me with the milking some, get my dinner started. Well, then I'd make a hand in the hay field, come by and get dinner on the table and feed them, get up from the table and do my dishes and catch them by the time they got to the field, make a hand all afternoon, and come in and chore that night. And Daddy volunteered me to help at the horse show at Buffalo during the fair. We had to hire a man to replace me in the field, and one to help him with the cooking, and he had to look after that. But
In the early days, what kind of cattle did they have out here?
it was mainly Hereford,
Hereford?
practically all Hereford. We've got Angus now, and they say, well, what's the best? Well, equal quality, they're equal, but getting the quality is the difference. But they handle different. You take a horn cattle, will handle altogether different to a muley cattle.
Yeah.
And one thing that's not on that tape out there, but I asked my dad one time, well, Roy Stewart wanted me to ask him. He said, what is the biggest change of your lifetime in the cattle business? He said, when they haul horses, when they put a trailer out.
Somebody's left their coat.
That's mine.
Oh, it's yours.
Yeah.
You have any longhorns?
I use longhorn bulls on the first-time heifers, and they'll calve easy. And get along, the calves get up and do a lot better. My son talked me into using some different bulls this year, and we've got along good calving, had light birth weights. We've got along real good. But I used them for years, longhorns. But they do the job.
You have the Herefords, do you?
Well, we used to. In 62, 2, I believe it was. We needed replacement heifers. Am I holding you too long here?
Well, we're supposed to be at another place at 4:30, so
Oh.
we're already
Okay.
late.
Thank you.
Yeah, well,
In 93,
Of 93, that's when Woodward was
when,
found.
This is March 12th, 1985. This is Joe Todd, an interview with Jennie Hayes in Woodward. Ma'am, when's your birthday?
November the 2nd,
What year?
91,
91. And where were you born?
at near Medicine Lodge, Kansas, in Barber County, Kansas.
Who was your father?
My father was William Henry Hamilton Hayes. They called him Ham.
Who was your mother?
He's Sarah Cornelia.
What was her maiden name?
Hers,
Her maiden name.
it was Hayes. She
Hayes.
was a Hayes before she married a Hayes.
Were your folks both from Kansas?
They came from Kansas here, but they both were born in Tennessee,
Tennessee.
Hancock County, Tennessee.
Did they ever say why they moved to Kansas from Tennessee?
Well, they didn't. They moved to Missouri first.
Did they ever say why?
No, I'm not. But I expect just greener pastures farther on.
How long did you live in Medicine Lodge?
Well, I wasn't in. It was on a farm out
On a farm.
from Medicine Lodge.
Okay.
Well, just till I was just about. I was 2 years old when we moved to Oklahoma. So that's all the time I lived there.
Do you remember the trip to Oklahoma?
No, I don't.
Did your folks tell you about the trip?
Well, yes, some things they have. They said
What did they say about it?
they had camped one night over by Alva, and some of the horses got loose and went back to Kansas. And so we had to stay a little longer there because of my oldest brother and my daddy went back to hunt for the horses. And,
How long did it take to find the horses?
well, we were just there a day or two, I think they said. Of course, that's all just what's been handed down
What part of Oklahoma did you come to?
here in Woodward County.
Woodward County.
Yes, my daddy made the run and settled near what's now Richmond community,
Okay.
down on Benton Creek.
Did he make the run of 93? Did he make the run of 93, the Cherokee Strip?
I didn't catch that.
Did he make the run of 93?
Yes.
Oh.
Did you?
Okay, did...
You know, there'd been a depression in the whole country before, and people got the president to open this for those people that were hard hit by it. And of course, most of the people that came into this part of the country were looking for a better way of life.
Did he make the run from the Kansas line?
No, he made it from the south of Kansas. See, most of them that made the run from Kansas line were from Kiowa there, but he and some of his neighbors went on down into the Cheyenne Arapaho country and made the run in because it had been opened, I believe, it just the year before.
Did he tell you about making the run, the day of the run?
Oh, well, he has talked about it a lot, of course, and they said he used to run his horse, practice his horse and running before they left Kansas. He would.
What did he tell you about making the run, the day of the run? What happened?
Well, I remember him saying that he had started to put his stake on a place just across the road, what was later the road across
from our place. And he said, the other man said, I've already staked this. So he just went across into the next section and drove his stake down.
How long did he run before he staked his claim?
I don't know. I never did hear them. Couldn't have been very long because they were the Cheyenne Arapaho country is right close to Woodward County.
And he made the run on horseback.
Yes.
What was the horse's name?
I don't know. I know we used to honor that horse, but I don't remember the name.
So you said that he trained the horse for the run?
Yes, he trained her.
And he made the run in September of '93, and then when did the family come down?
Well, it was November.
November.
Because it was a big family of us. They built 2 dugouts to accommodate all of us for sleeping, eating, and so.
Do you remember the dugout? Do you remember that dugout?
Yes, I do.
Tell me about it.
Well, it was kind of in the side of a bank a bit, and then it was built. And then they had cut limbs and put up across in the roof, and had a big, what they call a ridgepole, and they and put brush and stuff, and then put dirt on top of that.
How big was the dugout?
Well, it seemed to me as a child, it was pretty good size, both of them.
What about the furnishings in the dugout? What kind of furniture did you have?
Well, boxes for chairs, for of course, anyway, of course, had beds, and of course, Mother always raised geese and turkeys. I don't mean turkeys, ducks and geese, and she made feather beds. That was part of our sleeping. And
what about the stove? The stove, the cook stove? The cook stove, where was it?
the what, cook stove?
The cook stove.
Well, of course, it was just all one big room, and I can't remember exactly where the cook stove was.
How many kids in the family?
Mother was a mother of 14 children. 2 died in infancy. She and I, sister and I are the only ones left within family. And I've lived to be the oldest of any of the family, from my father and mother. We're both younger than I am now.
Was the inside of the dugout, were the walls covered or plastered?
Well, they used mud plaster a lot. They weren't really plastered like with plastering or cement.
Just mud plaster?
Mud. It just,
How long did you live in the dugout?
I can't remember the year. We have a picture in the wall, and there on the wall of the. My daddy went to the cedar canyons and cut cedar logs and built a 3-bedroom house. And we moved in it, but I don't remember when we moved out of the dugouts into the log house. And I would like for you to see the big enlarged picture of it in there.
As a small girl, what chores did you do on the farm?
Oh, I worked, hoed a lot in the garden because we're a big family. We raised a big garden, and that, and then, of course, I helped milk. I'd get up early in the morning before we went to school, and we milked as many as 21 cows a morning. We'd take a lantern and go out and milk the cows 4 times for breakfast and get ready for school.
Where did you start the school?
Where?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, it's first called Mount Sterling. My grandfather took the section of the quarter section next to ours, and his name was Sterling. So they built it on his part of the farm, and they called it Mount Sterling for him. Then it wasn't several years later, they moved the schoolhouse down across, we had Bent Creek was down in a grove, and they called it Sterling Grove. It was first Mount Sterling, then Sterling Grove.
Were either one of your grandfathers in the Civil War?
No, I had one of my mother's brothers was, but not neither my grandfathers.
Did you know your uncle?
What?
Did you know your uncle?
Oh, yes.
Did he ever talk about the war?
Not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Which side did he serve on?
He was a Confederate.
Confederate. What was his name?
Clifton Hayes.
Clifton Hayes. And he was from Tennessee?
He was born in Tennessee.
Yeah. Okay. Do you remember your first teacher's name in the school?
Yes. I can think of it. Pluma Chitwood.
I'm sorry?
Pluma Chitwood. She used to come by Hospice. She lived across the Canadian River from us, and she'd ride a horse, and she'd come by and pick me up, take me on the horse with her when I first started to school.
Mm-hmm. What kind of crops did you raise on the farm? What kind of crops did you raise?
We raised wheat, alfalfa, later than alfalfa, and cane, a lot of cane. I've done a lot of stripping of cane. I don't suppose you know what that is, but getting it ready to take to the sorghum mill to make sorghum. But you have to take that kind of a stick that was a piece of lumber that was sharper on one, and then go along and hit those blades off. And then the men would come along and cut it, get it ready to take to the sorghum mill.
Did you ever help make sorghum?
I didn't help make it, but I went with my daddy to where they did make the sorghum and watched him.
How do you make sorghum?
Well, they put the juice in a great big kettle, one of those big iron kettles outdoors, and boiled it. I don't know whether they put anything else in or not, but I know people today don't know how to make sorghum. I haven't tasted it, and it tastes like good old sorghum.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of our main foods, that and butter.
In the chores around the house, did you help your mother?
Yes.
Did you help with the cooking?
And, I did later when I got a little bigger.
What about making soap? Making soap?
Oh, yeah, I have helped make soap.
How do you make soap?
Well, different kinds. You can use just lye and grease for one way of making soap, but she used to make what we call soft soap, and that she used ashes. She put wood ashes in a barrel and that had a place where it could drip, water would drip out, keep pouring there, and save that, and that made lye, and then you use the grease. Because
Do you have to cook it?
no, yes, that you did.
How long do you have to cook the soap?
Well, I don't know. I've made it myself, but with just the lye and grease, and you don't cook it at all. You just mix it in, pour it in a box to harden.
How about doing the laundry?
Oh, it was washboard.
How did you heat the water?
Well, we had a well, and then we were on the creek, and a lot of times we'd take things that were real dirty down and wrench them out in the creek before we'd put them in We'd have to use a washboard. I still have one.
Did you do the laundry outside or inside?
Well, sometimes both, depends on the weather.
Did you boil the clothes first?
Boil them first. Well, usually Mother would always like to soak them, and then she'd boil them in a big boiler.
After you boil them, what do you do?
After you boil them, well, you rinsed them out good and hung them on the line.
When did you use the scrub board? Did you use a scrub board before you boiled them or after you boiled them? You know, the washboard?
Before.
Before.
And then maybe sometimes if they're real dirty, we had to do it after too.
Did you do the laundry on one certain day?
Well, usually we did Monday.
Monday?
Monday and iron on Tuesday.
Tell me about ironing.
What?
Ironing. How'd you do that?
Well, we went through various stages of ironing. I've got one old one in here I expect you to see. Those are heavy.
Show that on your,
Yeah, they certainly are.
show that on your
Yeah.
tape there.
And then later, of course, we had one that didn't have the handle on, but you clamped it down on.
Now, did this handle get hot?
Yes, they do. You had to hold it with a...
You you had to wrap the handle with something or what?
Well, you usually use a pot lifter or something and
Yeah.
put it over it.
Oh, okay. How many of those irons did you have? How many of those irons did you have?
Do I have now?
No, did you
Oh,
have
then.
back then?
I don't know.
How much of a shirt or a dress could you iron before it got cold?
Well, not too much. You'd have to keep changing irons.
How did you make your starch?
Out of flour a lot of times.
Flour and...
Flour. You mix it, take flour and mix it in cold water and then pour boiling water on it.
That was your that was your starch.
That was our starch.
What chore did you like to do best?
Oh, I suppose working in the garden. Of course, later I helped strip it. I pulled broom corn. I've done that.
How do you
didn't
pull
like
broom?
it.
How do you pull broom corn?
Well, you know it. You know how you've seen broom corn. You take a hold of the stalk and then grab that head, you know, and pile them on the ground and let them dry out. And then come along in the wagon and pick them up.
Which chore did you like to do least?
Seeding the broom corn, because that stuff got in your eyes till it was terrible.
Was there a broom factory around here? Was there a broom factory?
Yes, there was. My brother-in-law had one just down the road, not too far from where we are. He wasn't my brother-in-law then, but he later was my brother-in-law.
Do you remember the Spanish-American War?
Spanish-American War. I remember, I said, one thing I remember is we were going to school when McKinley was assassinated. About that, and so I don't remember a lot about the war.
The day they had McKinley's funeral, were you let out of school?
I don't think so.
You remember Teddy Roosevelt?
Yes.
How about Statehood Day? Statehood Day. when Oklahoma joined the Union, 1907.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember that day?
Yes, I do.
Tell me about it.
Oh, I don't know whether I can tell too much about it or not.
Was there a big celebration?
I don't think so.
Did the people on the farm celebrate?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I know we always celebrated the opening of the Cherokee outlet.
Mm-hmm.
We always had a big picnic.
Tell me about your early Christmases.
Well, of course, we didn't. We usually, what we got for Christmas were usually clothes that we needed. Those our gifts. And I remember that my folks, we didn't have a lot of cedar trees around like they do today, all over the country and pastures. But I know they'd put, instead of a tree, my folks would put our gifts on the dining table and then covered up with another tablecloth or something. And then we'd have to find those in the next morning.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a Christmas tree at school?
Yes, we usually did, and had the community program.
What were they like, the community celebrations?
Well, they just had different songs and dialogues and various things that way, and then they passed out the gifts.
What kind of gifts would you get at the school?
From the community, when we got dolls usually.
What kind of games did you play?
We play what we call party games, very much like square dancing. We used to do that at school at recess. And of course they'd have community parties.
Did you celebrate the 4th of July?
Yes, we did. Usually with a picnic down at a community. It wasn't a community grove, but a big grove about 3 miles from our house. They had, it was a good place for picnics and that.
Do you remember the Depression of 1907?
Not particularly, I don't.
Why did your family move to Woodward?
Well, my daddy said he wanted his the older children just went to a country school and went to what we called normal school at that time, and several different ones the family taught. And we forgotten what we were talking about.
Why did you move to Woodward?
Oh, and my daddy said he wanted his younger children to get high school education. And so he bought this house.
And you moved here in what year?
1910.
1910. Now, how far is the farm from
It was
Woodward?
about 36 miles from
36
here,
miles.
in southeast.
Did you come by wagon?
Yes, we did.
Tell me about that trip. Moving to Woodward.
Well, we had furniture and we were packed in the wagon, some of them, and then we brought a cow or two with us. You know, we kept in the backyard for a long time. Then we were allowed to keep animals in the town.
How many wagons did you bring?
I don't know.
And how long did the trip take you?
All day.
All day?
When we lived on the farm, I remember one time coming to Woodward with Daddy. They used to pick up bones on the way, and they were brought into Woodward and sold, and we used what we got for them to buy food that we needed or clothing. Something.
Where would you sell the bones? Where would you sell the bones?
I don't know where Daddy sold them. I know I came with him one time and we stopped all along the road. Of course, there was one of the cattle trails that went right along here, you know, in this part of the country. And the cattle, as they were driven up from Texas, they died on the way. So,
Were they mainly cattle bones or buffalo bones or both?
just any kind of bones. But they were one source of income, and for they.
Did you want to move to Woodward?
What?
Did you want
to
move to Woodward?
Well, I guess I did. We hated to leave the farm, of course.
Tell me about World War One.
Well, I was in school at Alva at that time, and I know when the armistice was signed, of course, school, I got up and walked up to college, not knowing. Of course, we didn't have TVs then, and the radio wasn't as active as it is today. And I went up to the college and nobody around. I thought that was what they just declared a holiday when the armistice was signed.
When did you go to school at Alva?
Where?
When?
When? Well, I first went in, I graduated from high school here in Woodward in 1914. And it was that summer thing. We went quite a bit of our college work at Alva in summertime. I went 1 year, all year there. But I just had 2 years at Alva because then it was just a 2 years college. All this, what are now universities were 2 years colleges at that time.
Were there many women that went to college at that time?
Yes, there were quite a few.
What made you decide to go to college?
Well, I was preparing to be a teacher, and so it was necessary. Of course, I taught first at 2 years in country school. We had what they called teacher training in our high school here, and I had taken that. So, and then I went to normal school and took the examination for first. Well, of course, we had to get a third grade certificate first, and then you could 2 years and then 3 years certificates. But I never did have to take those because I got my life certificate from Alva in 1919.
Did you board when you were going to school at Alva, or did you live on campus?
We boarded, a bunch of us from here, my two sisters and my two sisters and a cousin, 2 cousins and a friend, and we rented a house and did housekeeping. We took turns of cooking and buying the food and so on.
How many students were attending Alva at that time?
I don't know. I had my annual from Alva at that time, but I don't know how many.
Who was president of the college?
Well, of course, I went at different years, and we had Dr. Bazard. Where's he at OU now? I went to OU and did my AB and master's degree at OU. But
You know, the old building there
yes.
at Alva. What was Was that the only building on campus at the time? Was the whole school in that one building?
Yes.
And what year did you graduate from Alva?
1919.
1919. Do you remember who gave the commencement speech?
I don't know. I do remember that at one of our assembly programs that ex-President Howard Taft talked to us. I remember that, but I don't remember.
Did you meet any of the territorial governors?
No, don't think it did.
I was going to ask you if you remembered who gave the commencement speech at your high school graduation.
At my high school, I should. But after 93 years, of course it's been 93 years since then, you forget some things.
That's right. Was there any organized work to support the war effort at Alva?
What?
Was there any work to support the war effort? Like, did you sell Liberty bonds in Alva, or?
Well, we did here. I know they did an awful lot of them. Had big community gatherings. They did.
What about at the college?
I don't remember the college ever did. Of course, that was the year the year that I finished. It was the year of the 18 flu, that bad flu. We were closed off and on, and then we finished our work with correspondence.
Yeah. How bad was that flu epidemic?
What?
How bad was that flu epidemic?
It was bad. It was bad. A lot of people. Of course, then we didn't have the flu shots that we have today, and quite a few people from here died.
Where'd that flu start?
Where?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know. It sure hit Woodward hard. There were 3 of us down at the same time.
The 1920s.
1918.
Okay, 1918. What did you do in the 1920s?
Well, I was teaching at that time.
Where?
Well, I taught at Sharon. Of course, I've taught in Hooker and Forgan. I taught 1 year at Alva. But,
were there many flappers in this part of the country?
anyway.
Many flappers? You know, the girls that bobbed their hair and wore the short dresses?
Yes. Yes, of course, there always was.
Did you bob your hair?
Yes. I was teaching at Forgan at the time, and I went in the barber shop, and then I had great long hair. I could sit on it, and he cut one side. He said, "Now, Miss Hayes, are you sure you want this haircut?" And I had one already cut, and I thought, don't know what to do. No.
How about the Depression of the 1930s?
It was bad. I was teaching at Mangum at that time, and we had time about our warrants, of course, and the school board finally, they issued, if we had bills at any place in town, a grocery store or a drugstore, and place, they'd make out them, and we'd find out how much that was and make out one just for that amount. They wouldn't cash you, those stores and places wouldn't cash you, but they made it out the exact amount you owed them, why then they'd take your warrant.
What were you teaching in Mangum?
What did I teach? I taught in junior high. I taught history and civics, and my brother was my principal, and I taught a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm. How long did you teach in Mangum?
4 years.
4 years? What years?
I went there in 29 and taught those 4 years following them.
Let me. Tell me about the big dust storms.
Oh, my. There were more than one, of course, but it was terrible. And I know how one time I was at Hooker at that time, and it looked like a big prairie fire coming. It had moved in, just looked like the smoke of a big prairie fire. You probably don't know what a prairie fire is, but they said, folks told me I saved the family that, and all of our possessions the night we got into Oklahoma. But my daddy finally, I cried for a drink of water, and my daddy finally got up and got it, and this big prairie fire right on us. But it just looked like, and then it just got so dark, just as dark as night.
Was that Black Sunday?
What?
Was that Black Sunday?
I guess it was.
That was April of 35.
Uh-huh.
Tell me some more about that prairie fire you mentioned.
Oh, well, we used to have them because there was so much of that blue stem grass that grew this tall all over the country, and the fire gets started and it just goes miles. And of course, I don't remember it, but the folks said that it was right on us nearly, because they got up and tried to save, because the wagons are still loaded with things that we brought with us, and they tried to save the van. But and one of our neighbors lived not too far away from us had died in a prairie fire one time.
Did you save the wagons?
Yes, they saved the things.
What causes a prairie fire?
Well, somebody in some way let one get started, I don't know. Of course, now they always say people throw down cigarettes, but and start them and one thing or another, or burn illegally. They gotta, of course, we want to have these in California and Florida and all we've had, I don't know. Of course, some people think that's started on purpose to give somebody some work fighting fire.
How did the Depression affect you, 1930s?
Well, it made me feel rather depressed all the time.
Did you teach during the whole Depression with the Dust Bowl?
Yes.
What were you doing when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor? When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor,
Oh, yes.
what were you doing?
I was sick in bed. I remember my brother-in-law called over and he said they'd had bombed Pearl Harbor. And I got up and answered the telephone. And we had a relative, he'd been a missionary in China, and then he was missionary in the Philippines, and he was taken prisoner. He and his family were all taken prisoners.
What did you do during World War II?
I guess,
It was 41 through 45.
I was teaching in Woodward at that time.
In Woodward? How many years did you teach?
42 years.
42 years. And what year did you retire?
56.
1956. What have you done since then?
I've done, well, that first summer I was acting librarian here while our regular librarian was working on her master's degree at OU. I worked all one semester and part of other.
When did you get your master's at OU?
When? 38.
38?
Mm-hmm.
What did
Got
you
my
get?
degree, my bachelor's in 29, and then my master's in 38. I went to summer school.
Did you get your bachelor's from OU also?
Yes.
Tell me about OU in the 20s and 30s.
Well, I know quite different to what it is today, I'm sure, that we worked hard, expected to, and we would, I know at that time when they used to give us activity tickets and I took in everything. The fine arts programs and all athletic games and all. That year, the winter I was there during one year, regular school year at OU. And that was the year that Tom Churchill and Bruce Drake and those were High Roberts from here were on the basketball team. And I stayed at the Lacrones. The Lacrone boys were noted athletes at OU, Roy and Ray. And I lived in their home.
Tell me about the tornado.
The tornado. Our oldest brother was killed in the tornado here. His home was over on 15th. Destroyed their home, and the other brother that lived here, his home was destroyed. But we were living here, and we didn't think we were hit at all. But later, of course, cracks showed up in the plastering that it had a little bit. I know we had curtains up there, and they fell down. It was it. And I know my mother had already gone. She was living at that time. She'd already gone to bed. She said, "Feels like my bed's shaking." And the hospital then was just down the corner, down the block here, 2 blocks down. And I walked down there. Of course, I didn't know then there'd been a tornado till I walked down that way. And here they were just carrying people in. But, and then after the tornado, of course, we had an open house here because my brothers and his wife were with us because their home had been destroyed. And my brother was killed, his family were, the house was destroyed, and they were here a lot of the time. Finally, the Red Cross put up a big tent, and they lived in that till we got something built. But it was terrible. I remember I was having a meeting at our church that night, and I was supposed to pick up another lady. I went out ready to back my car out of the garage, and that terrible lightning. I never saw lightning or anything. So I just put my car back and came on in. And of course, I couldn't call the neighbor, the lady I was taking, because at that time our telephone was on strike. And of course, one of the telephone men went out south of town and connected up and reported the tornado.
What did you help with the wounded? Did you help with the wounded after the tornado?
No, I didn't. I helped a lady who was our physical ed director I helped with, they carried on some physical activities, games and all at the school grounds, and I helped her all the time. So I didn't.
You carried on.
What?
You had the sports activities at the high school.
They, of course, school was closed. We didn't have any school. I was teaching here at that time, but we didn't have any school at anymore and act regular. But they did carry on this activity, physical ed work, and I helped them.
Was the
carry
school
it.
damaged?
Yes, some of them were entirely destroyed. I was teaching over at the 2 blocks east of here, and our building wasn't.
What did Woodward look like, the part that was destroyed? The part of Woodward that was destroyed, what did that area look like?
Oh, I have a lot of pictures in my trunk that I could show you, but it had just rubble. Of course, telephone lines were and poles were down and in the street, and trees and just all kind of debris. All in.
You say you have photographs in your trunk?
What?
You say you have some photographs of the tornado?
Oh, I have a lot of the result after.
I'd like to see them sometime if we could.
Well, I'd be glad for it too.
Yeah. Don't have time today, but
Uh-huh.
some other time. Do you have any questions? Anything that?
Well, I think you've covered it fairly well. Who was the superintendents here when you taught school? Do you remember?
Well, Mr. Holmberg was first, Mr. Holm. Then I taught Mr. Wheeler, and I taught with Mr. Malloy,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't teach with Mr. Huey. I substituted when he was here, and
I'll bet you have taught some of the businessmen, that's very prominent businessmen here now. I bet you've taught them when they were children.
yes, I
Can you
did.
name some of them?
Yes, I taught Alan Cobalt,
Yes.
and I had Turner Quisenberry. He wasn't in my room, but I taught math and music in the room that I was in, that little building that was north of the old Central.
Mm-hmm.
And the other teacher and I would exchange.
Mm-hmm.
She'd teach reading in my room, and I'd teach music and
Math.
in hers.
Did you
And
teach Pratt Vi?
Pratt. No, I didn't
You
teach
didn't
Pratt.
teach
I taught R.J., his brother.
Oh, you did.
Mm-hmm.
What about Orland Trigo?
No,
You didn't teach
I
him.
didn't have Orland.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask, who are some of the prominent people in Mangum when you were teaching there?
Love it. That later they had. I had his son and daughter both in school, and I can't think the druggist's name at that time. It was Richard Wentworth, and
Did you teach any of Mrs. Teaton's children?
Miss Teaton. I taught Mrs. Teaton, and
Oh,
I
you
taught
taught Mrs.
I
Teaton.
taught Mrs. Teaton, and I taught her oldest daughter and her youngest daughter.
Christina.
I taught Christina.
Christina is one of my good friends.
Oh, yeah. I haven't seen her since she's been back. She doesn't stay here all the time,
No,
does she?
no. I interviewed Mrs. Keaton a little while ago.
Oh,
Yes.
yes.
Wonderful person, isn't she?
I taught her when I taught math in junior high here at the time I had Pearl.
Mm-hmm.
It's good.
Well, anything else?
Well, you haven't named your brothers and sisters yet, have you?
Oh, no, did I?
Let's name them.
Well, my oldest brother was Cliff. He's the one that was Clifton.
Mm-hmm.
He was killed in the tornado.
Yes.
And Cleveland, his name is Sterling Cleveland, of course, and he died just a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And Floyd, my brother Floyd taught school. He was back here and taught T&I at one time after he had retired.
Well,
He was in the Army a lot. He was reserve, and he'd be called to go here and there and everywhere. At one time, he was in Japan, and his son was in the Army in Korea,
mm-hmm.
and so his work was to identify bodies that were brought in, and so he asked to be changed because he didn't know what next one would be his own son.
Mm. Then the next one.
And then Floyd, he was the youngest one of the boys. There were just 3 boys.
Yes.
And then Sally Hofer. You know Jean Anderson?
No, I
Worked
don't
for a
know
long
so.
time at the Bank of Woodward.
No, I don't.
She's retired now. Her mother, Sally,
That's your sister. Mm-hmm.
and Celia, Jessie. She was married to Jessie. And Maud, my sister Maud, never married. Vivian and I neither one have. So, and then Blanche Perry,
Mm-hmm.
and
And the one that married Mr. Ray.
Olene.
Olene, I couldn't think of her name. Was she the youngest?
No, Vivian's the youngest.
Vivian's youngest.
Vivian's the baby of the family.
Well,
And Maud and Blanche, Willie lived at Versailles.
mm-hmm.
And
How many's left? Just you and
just the
Vivian?
2, yes.
Well.
Vivian and I are the only left of the whole
Of the
family.
whole family, yeah.
And I've lived to be older than any of the family.
Well.
Daddy died suddenly with an apoplexy when he was 70.
Mm-hmm.
But Mother lived to be 91.
Mm-hmm. I think Miss Hayes is getting tired.
Yeah.
I think you're getting tired.
Oh,
It's been such a pleasure to come and visit with
well,
you. I've been looking forward to visiting
well, I
with
thought
you.
you were going to come
Yes.
2, 3 different times.
Yes, that's right. But we just,
I don't know
things
what
came
you've
up
learned.
and we
Learned
couldn't.
anything about.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Well, Miss Hayes, thank you.
But sometime when you're back, I'd be glad to have those
Yeah.
their Kodak postcard pictures.
I think the museum would be happy to get those.
I thought maybe they would.
I don't know.
Okay, today is March 13th, 1985. This is Joe Todd, an interview with Eldon McCaslan in Sharon, Oklahoma. Sir, where were you born?
In Fargo, I guess.
And when's your birthday?
October 31st,
What year?
1918.
1918. Who is your father?
Chester Old.
And your mother?
May, Pauline,
What was her maiden name?
Hopper.
Hopper. Where were your parents from?
Well, they was from Kansas, as far as I know.
When did they come down to Oklahoma?
And early 1900s.
Did they ever say why they came to Oklahoma?
No. I guess just because they opened it up, something new, I guess, like all of them did when they opened it up.
Did they settle around Fargo?
Yes. My mother settled around Harmon.
Did you know your grandparents?
I knew my grandfather on my mother's side and my grandmother on my father's side.
Have any stories from them about their childhood?
I didn't know. I wouldn't know.
Any of your folks in the Civil War that you've heard of?
Yeah.
Who?
My granddad McCaslan, I guess, or
What was his first name?
John.
And where was he from?
I don't know. It was Illinois or Kansas or just where they were.
So he fought from the north then.
Yes.
Ever heard any stories about him in the Civil War?
Never. Nothing. Only had to discharge. When my mother passed away, we was going through some papers and found his discharge, I think it was. I don't remember who has it. Well, one of my sisters I know has it.
What kind of work did your father do?
He was a farmer.
Farmer. When they first came down here, what kind of house they lived in?
Well, he lived in a sod house.
You ever talk about the sod house?
Not, well, he did some, but never did tell me any of the structure or anything, you know, about the.
As a small boy, what chores did you do on the farm?
Not everything we're supposed to do. Feed the chickens, hogs, give them the cows, put feed out for them, work in the garden.
How big was the farm?
It was about 240 acres.
Is that an average sized farm for around Fargo?
Well, it was at that time.
You know, what time we talking about? What year?
When I was a boy.
What, 1920, early 20s?
Yes, 25, 26. And even up past that. In the last several years, they've got these tractors. Why? That is nothing to even start farming like they do now.
Did you farm with horses?
Yes.
How many acres could you plow in one day?
I don't know. Never did.
What, do you use a walking plow?
Well, sometimes we used a moldboard riding two-bottom plow. I really don't know how much Dad plowed.
What was the major crop you raised out there?
Crop?
Yeah.
Capricorn, maize, wheat, and alfalfa.
Tell me about wheat harvest.
Well, we never did go into that real big, but we always had to head the wheat back then. We didn't have a combine, and I don't know of anybody right close that did. But we'd head the wheat, stack it, and have a thrashing crew come in, thrash the wheat.
How many men on a harvest crew?
Probably 8 or 10.
That included what, the header and the header barge and
A couple of header barges. You had a driver, and you had a guy worked the barge. That would be 2, 4, 5. The stacker was 6. And then you'd have 2 or 3 around. Probably 9 or 10.
I understand the horses push the header to the header.
Well, it looked like they was pushing, but they was pulling. They was behind the header, but they had the single tree back up and they was pulling, say. It looked like it's pushing.
Now, how'd that work? The horses are behind it. How were
Yeah,
they
it's,
pulling?
well, I can't really. They had a long tongue back here or something, and the horses were here, and the tongue was back here, and the header was up here, and they hooked on. They walked between the
Okay.
back.
Okay. How many horses did it take to pull it?
I don't remember. Russell, what did it take? 4 or 6 horses to header?
They use 6.
6.
6 horses for a header. Did you prefer plowing with horses or mules?
Well, the horses are all we ever used.
No mules.
We never had any mules. I've worked for fellas that had mules. I never did like them. They'd always too stubborn. Maybe too much like me.
When did you start school?
I think it was 25 or 26. I was 7.
About 1925. Where was the school?
Where was it?
Yes, sir.
Well, it was Fairview is what they call it. It was a little old country school out southwest of Woodward.
How many students were going to school there?
Oh, about 15 or 18, I imagine.
Was it all 8 grades in one room?
Right.
How did one teacher handle 8 grades?
You know, I've thought that a lot of times. I don't remember. I just went a little over a year there. But it seemed like we got through the classes like they, ordinary. I believe the kids got more out of the school then than they do now. For the simple reason that the younger kids, they would sit and maybe study their lesson, maybe, could observe some of the stuff that was going on ahead of them. And I believe the kids were further along with the books than they are now. I mean, it seemed to me like they were.
How many years did you go to school?
12.
Go through high school?
Right.
Where'd you graduate from high school?
On there, Sharon,
Sharon? What year?
1937.
1937. How long did you live at Fargo on the farm?
5 years.
Fargo, where did you move?
Moved out here to, was west of Sharon, about 8 miles west, a mile and a half north. That's where I started school at.
Can you tell me what Sharon looked like in 23?
In 1923, no, I can't. We very seldom ever got to town. But I remember when there were lots of buildings, I mean, on both sides of the street. And had, Mr. Plow had a hardware store, and he sold tractors, machinery, had a grocery store, a cafe, and a barber shop. Another cafe, another grocery store, a hardware store, cream stations. I think they had about 4 or 5 cream stations at one time, and meat markets, meat market. Another grocery store, a post office.
Who was postmaster here?
The only one I can remember was Carrie Zahn, Mrs. Zahn. Let's see. Grace? I don't remember what Mrs. Zahn's name was before she married Mr. Zahn.
But she was a postmistress.
Right. The only one I ever knew up until she retired.
After high school, did you do any work for the CCC program?
No. Never did.
What about WPA?
No.
What'd you do after high school?
Well, I worked around different parts of the country for farmers, and then I went to work for Ray Jackson here in the grocery store and produce. Worked there about a year, I guess. Maybe a little more. Then I went to Woodward and went to work for Randy Davis Wholesale. I worked there till I went in the Army. Spent my time in the Army, came back, and worked for him about 2 weeks, then bought a grocery store myself.
And working on the farm, what kind of wagons, what brand of wagons did you have?
God, I don't know as I ever pay attention to that.
Now, I understand the best wagon was Studebaker.
Studebaker.
Did you work with wagons much?
No, not.
What year did you join the Army?
1941. I didn't join, they drafted me.
What month?
August,
Where'd you go through basic?
Fort Leonard, Missouri.
Tell me about basic.
It was pretty rough. We went in the Army there in August or September. Fort Leonard Wood at the time had it was a new camp, and they didn't have all these sidewalks and everything all like they do now. They was walkways or just boards and then gravel and dirt put in between it. Then the grounds were all muddy, terrible. And it was, we said it was the end of the world. It was Fort Leonard Wood.
What time was Reveille?
Reveille, I imagine about 6. I don't recall, but it was pretty early.
What, your average day consisted of what? PT, drills? What?
Yes. And then the basic fundamentals of just the Army, I guess. It was. I was an engineer battalion.
Engineer.
Yes. And we didn't do a lot of this combat stuff. Of course, we did take some training when we got out of there. See, we was engineer replacement training center, and some of the fellows that were there went to infantry, and some to Air Corps, and some different things. And
What weapon did you train with? What rifle? Do you have the Springfield
in
.03?
one Springfield.
Do you have the 03?
He's the oldest. He's the oldest.
That was the old type.
Yeah. After basic, what'd you do?
Well, we shipped out to Marchfield, California. And I went to the aviation engineers, which we were just a engineer outfit attached to the Air Corps. Our job was just to build airfields, strips and things for, and they ate Thanksgiving dinner on the train to out there. And,
On the troop trains, how many men were in one car? military take over all the frames?
No, I don't think it did. Not here, in the States.
How long did you spend in California?
Let's see, just about a month.
What'd you do from there?
Overseas. We went to March Field, and then and we was there when war broke out. And they sent us to March Field up on the Mojave Desert, and we was up there probably, I'll say 2 weeks, I don't know. We went from there to Angel Island, and was over there, I don't know.
You mentioned that you rode home to your mother and told her what ship you were,
Right.
and that ship was sunk?
No, it was reported sunk.
Reported sunk.
But we was all right. But I thought, we'll ride home and tell them what ship you're on. It was reported sunk, and how the folks would react.
Why was it reported sunk?
I don't know, it was just propaganda. This, you know, these little newspapers on the boat. I don't know, they just got stuff out like that. And whether it ever got back to the States or not, that it reported sunk or not, I don't know. It might have just been a little newspaper they had on the ship, but, well, we got all that information, but it was
Where'd you go overseas?
Melbourne, Australia.
Tell me about the trip. Anything happen?
Well, a lot of things. Well, we were left the 12th of January, and we was on the boat. Of course, they, you know, when you cross the equator, they always have to initiate you, you know. And our captain, we taken him and we cut a V in his hair, then dumped him in the water. And I guess I just about daily routine, and we got over in sight of Australia. You just see looked like a stick sticking out of the water. It's all you can see, but boy, those ships, they got the signal, and of course we had Phoenix, that was a cruiser with us. Boy, he run off out there and sighted off. They got the blinking, sending signals, and they'd get a little closer. We didn't know what it was, enemy ships or ours or what they were. And everybody went to the side and how the ship was going to turn over, but it didn't.
What did it turn out to be?
It was a fleet coming out to meet us, escort us in, and it was, I don't know how far out it was. We couldn't even see land, you know, for, I don't know, maybe a day or maybe longer than that. I don't remember how long it was, but it was.
Where were you when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor?
I was at, let's see, I don't know whether I was still at Melbourne or whether we was on our way convoying up to Darwin. And we started up through, there we got to Alice Springs. Let's see, I don't remember all the little places. We had 3 different gauges of railroad track. We'd load our machinery on one train and we'd go for a while, several days, and we'd run into some other gauge train, different width. We'd unload the equipment off there and get on another train, go, and then we'd come up to the desert. And there was no cigarettes, you know, Chesterfields and Luckies and Camos and all this. And we was smoking those, I can't even think of the name of them now. They were terrible cigarettes, why we didn't quit.
Were they Australian cigarettes?
No, I think they were American cigarettes, but they come in a carton kind of like a Prince Albert carton. I don't know, as I recall, they were 10 cigarettes in a package. Either 5 or 10, I don't remember. It wasn't a full package like they are now. But we smoked those, and those Australia come down, boy, they're giving us cigarettes, you know. I guess they would get them out of those ships up there. Have been raided.
When did the Japanese bomb Darwin?
I don't know, must have been about March or April.
42.
Yes.
Why were you convoying across Australia? How come they just didn't take the ships into Darwin?
Well, they, too many submarines, I guess, and they didn't have control of those, the Japanese, when they came down to Darwin, all they'd had it done, if they'd just known it, would just come up there and land it. There wasn't nothing there to ever stop them. No infantry, nothing. And they bombed Darwin, and that's as far as it went. And as far as I know, they didn't have any combat in Australia, or maybe any infantry combat.
What about the Battle of Coral Sea? Was that during that period?
Yes, well, it was after that. I know we were working building airfields when the Battle of the Coral Sea, and Guadalcanal and all those places over there. And let's see, look. I can't remember the dates. I can remember the times. I mean, but you couldn't really tell whether it was summer or winter over there. It was, you know, I was over there almost 3 years, and I never did see the winter. It was all summer to me.
How long did it take to cross Australia?
To cross it? Oh no, we went from Melbourne to Darwin. Of course, we'd travel and then we'd stop and change, you know, machinery. And I don't recall just how long it did. But on those trains, we'd have equipment on there. And they were, the cars would kind of bump, you know. They weren't hooked together like they are here. They had kind of a chain that just bump. We'd be going along, the first thing, going up a hill, guys all get off, walk, push the train up the hill.
With a steam engine?
Yeah, I believe it was. I don't know what it was terrible. You gotta think it. Army guys pushed the train up a hill.
At night, where'd y'all stay?
You mean when we were on the train?
Yeah.
I was slept in those cars.
Sleeping cars?
Yeah. And they were in kind of compartments like this room here. It'd be a room here, and then the clear off, you'd have to get out and go clear around, get off the train to get up in the other compartment of the same car. And you couldn't hardly sleep because it was just a banging and a popping. And,
What about on the convoy? Would you sleep at night?
I almost slept in the truck, sir. I can't recall how many days we were on the ship or trucks. But I know one time we was convoying up to the, and we stopped to eat dinner just like out here. And I'll tell you, the flies were terrible. I just couldn't eat. I never saw them so bad in my life. Hey, you'd open your mouth to take a bite of something and the flies would get on it. And it just, man, I like starving to death always going through there. And then those natives would be around there and the flies are crawling in their nose and their eyes and ears. And
Is that the Aborigines?
Yeah. And you try to eat and them flies, God.
Do you have much contact with the Aborigines?
Not really. I mean, we did occasionally, but you couldn't talk to them or anything. And some of them were kind of wild or mean, but we never did have any difficulties with them. But they'd always stand off the back, you know, and watch. And, natives, well, this is over in New Guinea. They were just, I don't know what kind of people you'd call them. They were just bushy haired, didn't wear any clothes, or just rags, you know, around them, grass skirts.
Now is that what they call the outback, the bush?
Right.
How long do you stay in Alice Springs?
Probably a month, probably. I just can't recall those times. I was so many places that I just don't remember how long we were in those places.
And how long do you stay in Australia?
We went to Darwin. Probably 6 months, maybe more than that, I don't recall. But we went from Darwin to Port Moresby, New Guinea. And like I say, I didn't have any diarrhea or anything. I didn't figure they would be here to tell about it anyway. But, you know, where you don't have any summers or winters, I mean, you can't, it's really hard to remember what it was. But
What did you do in New Guinea?
we built airstrips with what, it's like a jungle. We'd have to clear all that timber off, start from scratch and make airfields.
Now what did you do in the engineers? What was your particular job?
Well, I was, first I made corporal on the water going across, and I was just more or less a overseer of the work being done. And sometimes we non-commissioned officers would get out and work just like the private first class. And we built roads, docks, airfields, just whatever there was to do. We just, and combat engineers.
Japanese still on New Guinea at that time?
Yeah, plenty of them.
They ever attack you while you were working there?
No, they never did attack us. But they were back in the hills. See, the infantry would go in would take them. And they'd miss some, you know, that was hiding out. And they'd usually come in and give up, or I don't know what happened to them, but one fellow was cleaning off made a place for a gas dump. He run the bulldozer. Of course, he had his 45 strapped on him, you know. Boy, here come 5 or 6 Japs out of the bushes, their hands up, give up. He was just out there running that tractor. He didn't. It was quite a feeling, I imagine.
What'd you do with the Japanese when they gave up? Where'd you take them?
I don't know. They probably took him to some prison camp. We didn't do what we'd ought to done, I know.
From New Guinea, where'd you go?
Well, that's where I was up there in New Guinea. And see, we went from Darwin, or from Melbourne, round to Ore Bay, and Ore Bay to Finchhaven,
Oh, okay.
Lay, and Sador, and Landy, and we went from then Landy over to Biak Island, and that's where I came home from Biak. And on Biak, it was well, it was like the ground out here in the airfield. You couldn't go up and lay your hat down without being on a piece of shrapnel somewhere. The Navy, I guess, had just bombed that thing and shelled that thing. That was just a solid mess.
So, were you ever in combat?
No, I never was.
And what island were you on when the war ended?
Biak.
Biak?
Well, I wasn't there when the war ended. I was a state when the war ended. I'd had my time, had points enough to come back home, and I was in California. And,
On the trip back, anything happened on the trip noteworthy?
no, we was on an old Dutch freighter.
And where were you when the war ended? What part of California?
Salinas. I guess it was called Salinas Air Base.
What'd you do? Was there a big celebration there?
Oh yeah, they was.
What'd you tell me about it?
Well, I was. I can't recall when they was over, but we was downtown, I know, and there was wine, whiskey, and champagne. They was pouring on everybody, and they was just going crazy. Of course, we didn't have a long pass, you know, and that just like today. And that's all you saw what was going on during that day. But man, they was wild.
How long did the celebration last?
You know, I don't know. I went back to camp, and I didn't know when it was over.
When'd you get your discharge?
September the 12th, I think. No, September the 19th, 1945.
You came back here?
Right.
What'd you do after the war?
Well, I went to work at Randy Davis, the job I had when I went in the service, and worked there about, 3 weeks at the most, I'll say. About 3 weeks. And then my brother and I bought a store down here in Sharon. And we operated it for church business, I don't know, WSCS or something, and that she belonged to the church Wednesday night. So, well, it just kind of windy, and I don't know. Well, I won't go to town. My dad said, son said, I don't believe I'd go to town tonight. So I seen the windy it was and all. I just wouldn't do it. And I didn't. So next morning, when well, we didn't know anything about the tornado till the next morning. When the ladies from the school come over to turn in their order groceries for the schoolhouse, we said, well, what's all this stuff done over here in Jess McHenry's yard? Well, they said, Woodward blew away last night. And that's the first we knew that it happened. Of course, I didn't have any brothers or sisters there, but we had aunts and uncles. And we run the grocery store, went up, opened the store, and people coming down and wanting cream cans to haul water in. Well, we nicely turned all our cream cans loose, and they hauled water. Then when people would bring in their cream and sell it to us, well, we just had to weigh it and keep their cans till we got some cans out of Fairview. Afternoon, or maybe it was the next day, I went to Woodward, and I guess it must have been the next day. We didn't have much time to do anything. Some grocery store, them people, you know, in Woodward, they couldn't. Nobody had anything, and you couldn't slice meat. We did a good business on this thing up there.
Did you go up to help out or what?
No, they were running stores here in Sharon. But a lot of people here in Sharon did go up there. Some of them just worked for months, I guess, up there. I don't know whether they got paid for it or whether they just donated their work or what they.
How many were killed in that tornado with Woodward?
100 and some, maybe 200. I don't recall what they was. But I know there's 100 and some killed.
Yeah, someone told me that funnel cloud was so big it had an eye in the middle of it.
I don't know. But it was coming from the southwest, started out here at White Deer, Texas. Come all the way through, went to White Horse, Oklahoma. You know where that is?
No, sir.
It's up there by Alva somewhere. And I guess it was on the ground about all the way, except, you know, it wasn't as bad on as it was right here in Woodward. But some of the surrounding country out southwest of Woodward there was tore up. I know my wife had a brother-in-law he was killed, his boy was killed. No, his boy wasn't killed. They found him out in the pasture. He passed away here several years ago. I guess it was a result from a tornado.
Okay. How long did you have that store here in Sharon?
4 years.
4 years? What'd you do after that?
We moved to Woodward and bought a store.
What store did you have in Woodward?
McCaslan Brothers.
Is it still there?
No. Well, the store's still there, but they have a flower shop there now.
Well,
Lost it.
How long did you stay in Melbourne?
Oh, probably a couple of weeks.
What'd you do in Melbourne?
Well, there we were just waiting to get the equipment. But we couldn't take it over with us, and I guess waiting for orders or whatever it was to do.
You do any work there, build roads or?
No, not in Melbourne. We didn't do any road work until we got to Alice Springs. I believe it was Alice Springs.
How come they had you building roads?
Well, you had to have some way to go. There weren't any roads when, you know, they were, say, like this road down here. But we weren't close to this. We'd be out maybe 20 miles from this road here. We had to build everything with.
Had to build as you went.
Right. And I say build roads, we didn't really build them like they build them now. But we more or less built trails, I guess.
And what were these roads to be used for? For the convoy or what?
Well, yeah, or get back and forth to where to. We did these on the runways and things, and gas dumps. And they all the time had, well, you know, be hauling in gas and bombs.
You said that you'd be like 20 miles from a road. What were you doing that 20 miles from the road? What?
Well, I just said 20 miles. I don't
okay.
know. You know, you move in place and you're just there.
Was it more or less a military base that was set up then, or?
And over in Australia, we were up there in the desert, and we just make it, you know, like going out here in a truck, and going, and the dust, it gets so deep that you just go and throw over your knees, just nothing but just powder. That's just.
Do they have dust storms in Australia like we had here in the 30s?
I never saw one. They don't have the wind over there we have. I can't recall any windstorms we ever had. I know they had plenty of rain.
What was the reaction of the Australians to the Army?
Well, I think they accepted us pretty well. They were sort of a jealous type of people, and which you couldn't blame them the way the Americans did when they came in.
What do you mean, what we did when we came in?
Well, that more or less just took over,
Mm-hmm.
and they felt that we were just moving in on them. But they were fighting a bunch of people. I mean, they were as good as you would find. You could say there's a machine gun nest out there, and go get it, and they'd go. They didn't do like we did, you know, kind of surround it. They just hid up there, and then some of them get it. They might lose a lot of men, but they'd sure get it.
Well, I think we have a good interview.
As I told you about some of it. A lot of it I could tell, but I don't know.
Well, I was going to ask about the dust storms on Black Sunday. Were you around here when in the 30s and the dust
Yes,
storms?
I was.
What did that dust storm look like, Black Sunday, coming in?
Well, it was just in the northwest, it just big old black, and it just got dark, and they'd have the lights on. Well, lights, I don't know whether we even to even see. Take sheets and wet them, put them, hang them over windows and doors. Where you get,
That keep most of the dust out?
no, it kept some of it out.
How long do those dust storms last?
Oh, God, I don't know. Seemed like it lasted forever. But they was, oh, probably a day or two, wouldn't you say, Grace?
I imagine, I don't know, some of them came in the night. I can remember waking up and there being, you know, just dust over everything.
Well, the storm had come in maybe it'd last, maybe this afternoon, tonight, but it'd still be dusty
Yeah.
tomorrow.
It sure would be just that fine stuff in the air.
The Dust Bowl lasted how many years, basically?
I don't know. We moved down here in '39 and it lasted after that, I would say it, at least till 40 or 41. But I don't know for
So
sure.
we're going, what, 7, 8 years then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But 33 is about the time that
One was
That
born in
was
'35 and that was just Black Sunday
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, that was the biggest one, April 14th of 35.
Mhm.
That was the big one. Okay.
oh my boy, that Sunday was,
What did that dust storm look like when it was approaching? That went on Black Sunday.
it looked like the world was coming to an end. It just come up and
It
then,
bellowed, didn't it? I mean, you could see the movement in it.
How high was that dust storm? How high up in the air was the dust?
oh, well, I wouldn't know, but it was, it'd be 5 feet.
Well, thank you.
Oh, I bet not.
I wouldn't take $1 million for what I went through, but I wouldn't give you a penny to,
Live it over.
no. And we really didn't have all that bad. I mean, living conditions were our worst. But as far as war, it didn't bother us.
Well,
But the living conditions, that you sleep out in the rain and all that stuff, and you couldn't, it just boggy, damp all the time, everything mildew.
oh, that's depressing too, besides that.
Be out there and my billfold, I know I brought it home. You take the smell and just smell moldy.
At the Nuremberg, where'd you go?
Well, we went to Bamberg and built an airstrip, and then from there we went to Beirut, or Bayreuth, however they said. And by this time they were shipping families over there, the families of the occupation army, and setting up military districts. And that was part of our job. We'd pick out a certain section of town and knew how many families were coming in, and of course we'd generally pick a pretty good section of town and move all the Germans out. And when the families came, GI families came over, they just moved in. They could hire any of them they wanted to as maids or so forth, but generally what we'd done, we'd go to the burgomaster, the mayor, and tell him what the setup was, and he would see that these people were moved someplace else and get them jobs if he could, this sort of thing. But they didn't have no choice but move.
Yeah. And you came back to the States what time?